Hello and welcome to Emotion Regulation Session 4. So first of all, and most importantly, let's prepare ourselves for the session. Do you need to change your posture? Do you need to make yourself taller, more upright, more alert? Are there things that you need to do to just remind yourself where to focus when your mind goes off wandering? Do you need to change the environment you're in? Are you lying down right now? In which case, possibly not the most effective way of tuning in, though very tempting, I'm sure. So have a think about your environment and your posture, what you're focusing on, so that you can get the maximum amount out of this video, because these videos are so incredibly important. The skills we're teaching here are so incredibly important. Because what they're doing is they're making you more aware of your feelings. They're making you more aware of what your feelings can do for you. They're also giving you more options. And when we have more awareness and more options, we feel more in control. And when we feel more in control, we have those options, we have more awareness, then we are much more effective. And this helps us live more productive lives that feel like they're worth living. So I hope I've sold you. Without further ado, we will have a look at our usual timetable. Okay. So we, as usual, are going to do a mindfulness exercise first, teeny tiny recap. And then we're going to look at the skills delivery for Emotion Regulation 4 and the homework for this week. And we also, as always with mindfulness, what we are looking at is the practice of mindfulness. So it's not necessarily a relaxing exercise, but it is something that is a discipline that gives us education on how we can bring our minds back to the things that we want to focus on, how we can become more aware of the patterns of behaviour and thoughts and feelings that occur for us that often make us not very effective in life. And sometimes the timing of these things affect how urges and motivations to do the tasks that we're wanting to do. So with all of this, what I'm asking you to do is to become much more aware of where your mind is going off to and how you're going to bring it back. To be aware of what your mind generates, whether it comes up with any rules around what it is you should be doing, whether it becomes attached to a different part of the exercise, whether there are judgments about the exercise itself or judgments about yourself in how you are managing the exercise. What assumptions you might make, even as I'm talking now about what it is we're going to do and whether you will have an urge to do it or not, whether there will be a resistance or not. And when we start the exercise, any assumptions that you might have. And throughout all of this, and similarly to the other videos that we've been doing, I'm asking you to be aware of your body. So even as you sit here now, to just allow yourself to scan your body from the top of your head down to the tips of your toes. Are you in a position where it feels like you're alert but centered? Where your feet maybe are grounded on the floor? Are you in a position where you're inviting your mind to focus on the exercise that we're doing? The mindful exercise we're going to do today is an observe and describe exercise. I've chosen this exercise because it felt like it linked with some of the areas we're going to be looking at in this PowerPoint, and particularly around describe. And you will recall from your mindfulness workshops that when we're describing something, we're describing what we can actually see, not or what we could actually feel, or what we can actually sense, or what we can actually hear, not the interpretations we place on that or the assumptions that we make about that. So without further ado, I'm going to show you a picture, and I am going to ask you to describe what you see in that picture in a mindful way. And I just want you to observe what that sensation's like for you. Okay, this is the picture that we're going to be studying with our observe and describe. And when we're doing this, I'm going to invite you to bring your mind back whenever it goes off wandering by focusing on the octopus here, or anything else that's just caught your attention right now as you're looking at this picture. And when we're describing, you're focusing on what you're actually seeing. So for instance, if I was not describing, I would probably say, oh Lord, look at that boy about to dive in the pool with a shark swimming around in it. That is so not going to end well. Now I am putting a lot of assumptions in there, a lot of interpretations there, and I am assuming a lot of consequences. And I know that that is something that I can do very regularly in everyday life, where I can see things about to happen and I make assumptions about what could take place. Now that can be very useful. It can also be very unhelpful if I believe that those assumptions are true and that my interpretation is the only interpretation. So if I was looking at this from an observe and describe point of view, I might say, well, actually what I see in the present is a boy on a horizontal column pointed at one end and positioned over a pool of water. In the water there is a black shape with part under the water and part above the water. So what I'm commenting on, what I'm observing and describing, is what I'm actually seeing, rather than the interpretations and assumptions that I'm making, and also the judgments that I'm making when I'm looking at this picture. So we're going to do this for 2 minutes, and I'm just going to invite you to just look at the picture, observe and describe for 2 minutes. So, what did you notice? How did you manage this mindfulness? Were there patterns emerging that appear in your everyday life? I know that this is an exercise that I often experience frustration with, and certainly when I was doing this, I noticed a thought of, I don't want to have to do this, because I know that my brain is much happier just floating around and interpreting things as it likes. And when I noticed that thought, I also noticed a feeling of resentment about doing that. And at the same time, I know that this works really well for me. So I brought my attention back by looking at the octopus. What did you use to bring your attention back? Are there notes that you could just jot down now about what you noticed about those thought processes that you had, any urges that you had? Are there things that you think you could link with everyday life that you could discuss with your individual therapist? Okay, so our teeny tiny recap was looking at last week and this week about how we use checking the facts, opposite action and problem solving. And what I asked you to do is do some pros and cons. How did you get on with that? How many did you do? How effective was it? And how did you get on with your homework? What did you learn? You were able to write down a few things now that you can remember from last week. Would it be helpful to go over the video again? Now what we're going to be continuing with this week is opposite action and problem solving. And if you remember, what we did last week is we looked at check the facts and how we do that. We looked at different emotions and how you might do that with different emotions. And this week what we're going to focus on most of all is opposite action and problem solving. So if you remember, what we were looking at is that sometimes what we feel in the moment doesn't actually fit the facts of the situation. Sometimes when we feel that amount of emotion in the moment, it does fit the facts of the situation, but actually it's not effective to have our emotions at that level of intensity. So what we're looking to do is we're looking to find the amount of emotion that fits the facts of the situation that we find ourselves in, and also the amount of emotion that we feel we want to feel in order to deal with the situation that we're in most effectively. Also looked at sometimes the emotion that level of intensity of the emotion we're feeling doesn't fit the facts of the situation. We need to upregulate. So it may be that in some ways we've shut off from some emotions that would be really useful for us if we were able to get in touch with them. So again, then we're looking at upregulating our emotion to a level that makes us much more effective. And when we're looking at this, it's really important to include a validating statement about that sort of looks at the facts of the situation, but also takes into account the reasonableness of the emotion that we might be feeling and what we might want to be doing. And we call these validating statements. These are things that support the amount of emotion that fits the facts. And that might be, you know, that we feel that it doesn't address all the problem solving aspects of it. It doesn't address the urges that we want, but actually what it does do is it gives some sort of statement that validates us in what we're feeling. It's also really good at making us describe what's actually happening rather than catastrophizing, having that spiral, particularly with sadness, where we collect other things from this. So for instance, instead of feeling sad and saying I've lost everything, we would stay with the loss at the moment. We would do fit the facts and we'd say I feel sad because this conflict has affected my relationship with my sister and I miss what we had before. So what you'll notice about these validating statements is that we're trying to move away from blaming and shaming. What we're trying to do is we're looking at the facts and the understandable emotions that accompany those. So instead of, I can't go near there, it's too frightening, stay with the actual current threat. I feel afraid because of things that have happened in the past. That's understandable that I would be affected by them, and they are not happening now. So what we're saying is it's understandable I'm having these emotions, and at the same time these emotions aren't justified for the current situation. Another example would be I always mess up other people's lives. So instead you're going to stay with the current behaviour that's caused the problem. I did not behave in a way that made me feel good about myself. I want to repair this. That's something that most people might feel. I might feel guilt if I behave in a way that doesn't make me feel good about myself. It's an understandable emotion. So I want you to bear in mind that it is a skill to be able to look at the facts and reframe those thoughts and feelings in a way that better captures those facts in the current moment. It takes practice. So as I'm sitting here saying these things now, this is not something that just comes easily. This is something that takes many, many, many times of going over situations, looking at what is valid in those situations, what is justified, how can I best find a phrase that sums that up. And think to yourself when you've been able to make a validating statement to yourself and the effect that that has. Pause a moment to just jot that down. What effect does it have when we find a statement that feels like it validates our emotions and the situation that we're in? This slide relates to handout 9, and I think it's particularly useful flowchart of when we need to think about what we need to use in a particular situation. Are we needing to go with opposite action? Are we needing to go with problem solving? Are we needing to go with a bit of both? Personally, I think problem solving is one of the most effective ways of dealing with our emotions, because of the fact that if you solve the problem, your emotions will go down. You may have some after effects, but your emotions will go down. Equally, opposite action is amazing for being able to change our emotional state and reduce the intensity of the emotions that we're feeling. I want to draw your attention to this part here. There are many, many times when we check the facts and we believe that our intensity of emotion fits the facts. And then what we do is we ask ourselves, so is acting on this emotion effective? And checking wise mind is essential here, because sometimes it can feel like in the moment like, yes, it is absolutely effective to act on this emotion. However, it might be effective because it might just make us feel good to be able to act on that urge or to experience those emotions. So there's an interesting studies on anger, in that the physiology of anger, so the body sensations that it gives us when we feel angry, are very similar to those of happiness. So that sort of makes sense, doesn't it? That we might become confused between anger and happiness, and if our energies are quite low and we want to feel some energy, and anger gives us energy, doesn't it? We know that it prepares us for things, so we have a surge of energy through our bodies. So sometimes we might be tempted to act on our emotion of anger because what we're wanting is that surge of energy or that feeling of being alive. So then the question you might want to ask yourself at that point is, not only is acting on this emotion, is it effective? But also, is there a different way of getting what I need right now? What is it that I am seeking? Am I likely to increase my chance of happiness longer term or gain energy if I use a more effective way of doing this. I really like this cartoon clip. I like it because it's a really good example of how our bodies and minds react to a particular emotion, in this case feeling very sad, very low. And sometimes it may be that we have justifiable reasons, very valid reasons for feeling the way we do, but actually we're in a situation where it wouldn't be effective to feel that level of intensity. And what this cartoon is showing us so beautifully is that if we just change our posture, we affect our emotional response. And that's what we've been talking about in the last couple of PowerPoints, is that when we feel an emotion, it affects both the neural pathways in our brain and our sensations in our body. It makes us move in different ways, it makes us stand in different ways, it makes our facial expressions different, and it creates urges in our body that are usually associated with survival. So here, this sort of depressed stance changes completely when you straighten up and hold your head high. Brings energy down your core, and it makes you feel more alert. So I just want you to just double check your posture right now. Have a little pause. See how you're sitting. If you change it, does it make you feel different? So what we're saying here is that doesn't mean to say that you get rid of that sadness. It doesn't mean to say that sadness was not justified. However, what it means is if you can do something to reduce that intensity in some situations, that can make you much more effective. So we use opposite action when emotions don't fit the facts. And we also use opposite action when acting on our emotions is not effective. And acting opposite and all the way, and we'll come on to look at this later, what all the way means, will change your emotion response. And there are many, many different therapies that rely on this. So, for example, behavioural activation relies on doing the opposite of things we are avoiding. So if we are isolating ourselves, we're being inactive, we're ruminating on things, what we're doing is we're encouraging people to do the opposite of that. We're encouraging them to go out, we're encouraging people to do activity, we're encouraging people to do things which allow them to stop the rumination. And that in itself has an effect on things like, for example, depression. Equally, exposure techniques for phobias, for anything around fear and anxiety, work exceptionally well when we are asking people to stop avoiding and to confront things that they feel fearful about but are at that moment not justified. Equally, effective treatments for anger and stress include identifying cues to when you have these emotions and then leaving the situation to cool down rather than going on the attack. So there are many different therapies that rely on opposite action and are extremely effective. Opposite action works, and it can work quite quickly and effectively without us having to analyse our thoughts a lot, without us having to go back into the past and process that. So behavioural opposite actions can work very effectively in managing our emotions, in allowing us to have more control and be more effective in the world. Sometimes knowing the facts about a situation and just checking the facts can actually reduce the intensity of our emotion, and sometimes our emotion goes. As we check the facts, we've established that actually we're okay, and we no longer feel that strong emotion. So a good example of that is perhaps having previously had a fear about going out and going outside, feeling that anxiety, and then just checking the facts and doing that. And right now, in this moment, in this place, am I safe? Right now, in this moment, in this place, is anybody physically attacking me? Those two questions can often bring down anxiety quite quickly and allow somebody to just proceed with the task that they were doing at that time. Sometimes knowing the facts about a situation just doesn't work. You sort of know it intellectually in your head, but you still feel anxiety. So things like going on a plane is a really good example. So people might know the facts about how safe it is to travel by plane, and they might know that in their head, but actually what's happened is they're still feeling very, very anxious. Another example is in my head, when after I'd had the car accident, in my head I knew that actually sitting in a stationary vehicle was safe. I mean, you know, unless something extreme happened, and I still felt anxious. So knowing about the facts about the situation did not help my level of anxiety, and that's when opposite action works best. And we've already spoken about when the emotion is not justified by the situation, or whether it's not effective for meeting your goals in that situation. Another really good one is opposite action when you are avoiding what needs to be done. I mean, how much have you done that today? How much did you do that yesterday? Are there things that you said to yourself yesterday, I am definitely going to do, and today you didn't? Or were there times where you sort of did a bit of it, but you didn't do all of it? So opposite action works really well for when we're avoiding things that need to be done, things that meet our longer term goals. Okay, so we're going to go through opposite actions step by step. And I would encourage you to review the handout for this as well. And there's also the worksheet right at the end of this PowerPoint, which we'll be asking you to do for homework. So we're going to do this in a slightly more abstract way, and then later on we're going to have a look at some particular emotions which you might do opposite action with. So the first thing that we have already established in last week's PowerPoint is you need to identify and name the emotion that you want to change. And we were just emphasising that don't overthink this, go with the first one that you're noticing, because if there's others around that need dealing with, they will emerge, and you can just jot those down, and you can also use this with those. Sometimes you're in a situation where those emotions change. Check the facts. Does this emotion fit the facts of the situation? Identify and describe your action urges. So just take a moment to just center yourself and just think, okay, what is it that what's the urge that I have to do, that I'm wanting to do at this moment? Sometimes if you've been a bit confused about what emotion you're feeling, identifying the urge gives you a clue to what the emotion is. This is so important. Take that step back and ask your wise mind, consult your wise mind, allow yourself to access it, and ask yourself the question, is expressing or acting on this emotion effective in this situation? Then what you're going to do is you're going to do opposite to the action urges, and what you're not doing is suppressing your emotions. What you're making sure you do is you're acting opposite. So for instance, yesterday after I finished work, my urge, I was feeling tired, my urge was to sit on the sofa, and I can tell you that urge was really quite strong. When I consulted my wise mind, my wise mind said quite clearly that sitting on the sofa was a very understandable urge to have in that situation because I was tired. However, in the longer term, that was not going to help me feel very good, because going out in the fresh air and having a walk would be far more effective for me. So I used opposite action to do the opposite of my urge at that particular time. Do opposite action all the way is one that we will go on to speak about, and one that I want to spend some time on here. We're very, very good, aren't we, at sort of going, yeah, well, I did a bit of it. So opposite action all the way is to go for a full walk for a good hour. Doing a bit of opposite action will be to have a little light stroll down to the end of the street and back and go, oh, well, you know, I'll do a bigger one tomorrow. That is not opposite action all the way, as tempting as that may be. There are other times when we don't do opposite action all the way, and it doesn't work for us very well, and I'm going to read a few out, see if you could identify with them. So one might be you're trying to reduce your social phobia, and so you decide that you're going to go to a party. What you do at that party is you stay in the corner of the room and you spend all your time looking down and not moving from where you are. Or you might get on a plane to reduce your fear of flying, but think all the time throughout the entire flight, it's going to crash, it's going to crash, it's going to crash. That is not opposite action all the way. And it's not effective. It doesn't work very well. It just keeps your feelings, it just keeps your emotions going. So there's another one where you might be feeling quite angry with somebody, or you might be feeling quite disgusted with them. But you know that it's not effective to act on that, so you want to be kind. However, whilst you're being kind, what you're actually thinking in your head is, oh my God, you idiot. That is so stupid. Or, oh my God, you jerk, how disgusting. Now, as much as you might like to kid yourself into thinking you're coming across as fine, I can tell you now that what they are picking up is whatever you're thinking underneath. That is not opposite action all the way. You might decide that actually you're going to speak up more in a group, and you start speaking, and then you pay attention to a thought of, oh, that was so stupid, shouldn't have said that. That is not opposite action, that's halfway, going halfway. Another one is about using our voice or our posture in a completely different way. So you might come across and say, oh yeah, I completely understand your point. Being really sarcastic, but looking like you're sort of agreeing. Or you might say, somebody might be encouraging you to go out when you're feeling sad. So you go, oh, okay, I'll come with you. And then you go with them, and the whole time that you're out, your head's down and you're sighing a lot. So you are going out, you're right. That is halfway towards opposite action. But actually, it's not opposite action all the way, and that is not going to affect the intensity of sadness you're feeling. And you know what? It's also probably going to annoy the person that you're with as well. So what you know is, if you're going to do opposite action all the way, it has got to be with the whole of you. It has got to be with your posture, it's got to be with your facial expression, it's got to be with your breathing, it's got to be with your temperature, it's got to be challenging the thoughts and reframing the thoughts that come through your head. It's got to be doing opposite action to the urges that you're having. So opposite action all the way is all of you, not a specific part of you. And here's another important one. Repeating acting opposite to your action urges until your emotion changes is really important. If you've always been frightened of speaking up in a group, doing it once is not going to change the intensity of your emotion immediately. It's something that you need to do repeatedly. And the more you do it, the less emotion you feel. So this is where radical acceptance comes in, is that whilst I'm practicing this, it is going to feel uncomfortable, and I am going to have to keep going with it. And eventually it is going to have an effect. So for instance, I can remember when I first started doing some lecturing, the first time I would meet a new group of students, I would feel really anxious inside. And when I was sitting down, and we used to do this thing where you used to sit in a circle, so you were quite exposed, everybody could see you, I used to know that my knees would shake. So I used to sit with my hands on my knees to stop them shaking. So I was getting some pretty big cues here that actually I was feeling quite anxious. Now, the more that I put myself in that situation, the more new groups of students that I met, the less my knees shook. And eventually I came into a new group of students one day and I sat down and I was halfway through the lecture and thought, oh, my knees aren't shaking. So I suppose what I want to say is it's important to examine the assumptions and expectations we have of ourselves in these situations and to be kind to ourselves. If you're doing opposite action all the way, it is going to work and it may take time, and that might feel quite uncomfortable while it's taking time. It's about sticking with it, practicing it, doing it over and over again, and it does work. Okay, we're going to have a look at fear, and you will no doubt remember from our last PowerPoints when we had a look at fear and anxiety. What we were looking at was when does it fit the facts? And we're looking at the fact that actually it is an emotion that's helped us survive as human beings. It's really crucial that we have fear and anxiety because it keeps us safe. However, sometimes our brain gets confused with the things that has happened to us in the past and whether they're happening again now. And it also gets confused between a sort of psychological harm and physical harm. So the questions that we're asking ourselves when we're trying to find out whether our fear is fitting the facts is our life or that of someone we care about being threatened? Is our health or that of somebody we care about being threatened? Is our well-being or that of somebody we care about being threatened? And when we're talking about well-being, we're talking about the necessities of life. We're talking about, is there a roof over our heads? Is there enough food to eat? Are we able to get shelter? Are we able to have enough water? Those are our basic necessities that would affect our well-being. Are we able to be in contact with other people? So, to have a look at this, we're going to have a look at a bit of a story. So I just want you to get your pen and paper ready. Okay. So I want you to imagine that you are working in an office. Okay. Now, for some bizarre reason, you go in one morning and you open the office door and you see a poisonous snake hissing at you. Now, I am guessing that you, as I, would shut that door pretty quickly. So you would shut the door pretty quickly and you would make sure that you move away. You are afraid to open that door again. Is your fear in that situation justified? Does it fit the facts? Yes, it does. Fits the facts because this is a poisonous snake. If it bit you, you could become seriously ill or you could die. So this is a serious situation. You are absolutely right to feel that fear, and that fear has helped you act on that urge to get away from that threat. Then continue to the next day. During the night, the office manager has had somebody come in pretty sharpish, because as you can imagine, everybody's a bit terrified about having a snake in their office. And they have come in, they've got rid of the poisonous snake. So it is no longer in your office. However, nobody has told you that. So you go into the office and you are still afraid to open the door. Is that fear justified now? Now, it's not a justified fear because the snake is no longer in the office. However, it's a very understandable fear because of the fact that you do not know. So a validating statement would be, I am feeling afraid, understandably, because at this moment, I don't know when I open that door whether that snake will be there or not. So what you're moving into then is, I need to downregulate my fear, not open the door, and I need to check out what the facts actually are. Now let's say that you find out that actually the snake is no longer in the office. So you're quite chuffed that you've found out that the snake is no longer there. In your head, you know that those are the facts, but when you put your hand on the door to open the door, you still feel that fear. Is that fear justified then? Does it fit the facts? The answer is, of course, no, it doesn't. There is no threat to your life at that moment. There's no threat to your health at that moment, and there's no threat to your well-being at that moment. So your fear at that moment does not fit the facts of that situation. So let's just cast our mind back to what we're doing with our bodies, our facial expressions, our urges when we are feeling fear. And obviously this little chap here is a very good example of that. Okay, so it's a moving away action, isn't it? We're closing in on ourselves. We're wanting to hide. Our eyes are wide and eyebrows up. Breath is quite short. Muscles very, very tense. So what do we do? Okay, so the first thing we do is we do the opposite of what our fearful action urges are. We put our hand on that the door handle and we open the door. We go into the office. And we do that over and over again. So when you do that, go back out again, then open it again. Then go back out again, then open it again. The more often you do that, the more you're sending signals to your brain that actually it's fine, there is no danger. What we're also going to do is we're going to pay attention to the whole of us, that all the way opposite action for fear. So instead of like this, we're going to change our body posture. We're going to be full on. We're going to put our shoulders down. Our head is going to be up. If we are paying attention to our breathing, we'll be doing a deeper breath. We'll be doing a paced breathing. We pay attention to our eyes. Eyebrows down slightly. Eyes normal. Relaxed jaw. Breathing. And we would walk in with confidence. And that is opposite action all the way for fear. Now, if you are somebody who has had a lot of fear and anxiety in your life, you are likely to start holding yourself in a way that makes you almost ready for anything to happen. So what happens is you sort of find yourself sort of shrinking. You might find yourself feeling quite tense. You might find yourself moving away from people. That sort of body language will send recurring messages to your brain that there are things to be frightened of. And so practicing changing your body language, becoming more aware of your posture and changing your facial expressions and your body all the time will allow those messages to stop going to your brain so repeatedly, and eventually will have a longer term effect on your well-being. There's a really good TED talk that I have put a link to in the text that I've sent you with the link to this video, where they are looking at what happens when we hold a particular posture for 2 minutes or longer. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of public speakers and politicians who've got hold of this. And I think there was something in the newspapers when the elections were on about how all the politicians had suddenly started standing like this, you know, like hands on hips or legs apart, because it gave them a sense of mastery and control that then came over in their voices. So I put that link on to the TED Talk because I think it's really interesting about how over a period of time we can change the way we hold ourselves, which then gives us more control and mastery over how we approach things, but also how we appear to others as well. So it's really important. And this is particularly important when you come on to have a look at times when you feel guilty and you apologise a lot. So we'll come and have a look at that as well. So, are you somebody who does this a lot? Sorry, 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 I'm so sorry. And then do you apologise for saying sorry a lot? If you're doing that and it's not fitting the facts of the situation, bear in mind it is something that is very dominant in our English culture. However, it's also something that can be a consequence of having been in situations where we felt under attack a lot. So an opposite action could be to right now make a decision to yourself of, actually, do you know, I am going to stop apologising. I'm going to become much more aware of when I'm apologising to people, and I'm not going to do it. And in order to help myself not do that, I'm going to change my body posture. So instead of shrinking away, so sorry, bent over with guilt, I am going to be upright. I'm going to change my body posture. I might even have a wee look at that TED Talk that Angela spoke about. And I'm going to stop apologising. So when we were looking at emotions, we were looking at what are the prompting events for guilt and shame. When do guilt and shame fit the facts? And they usually fit the facts when our behaviour violates our own moral code or values, or when we have committed a transgression against the group norm. And obviously that's culturally bound. It turns into shame when this could lead to expulsion from the group if those actions are made public. And what we were looking at is that sometimes what we suffer under is unnecessary guilt. We feel guilty about things that actually just don't fit the facts at all. And that's when we need to look at opposite action. And it's also when we need to examine and look at the facts and check in with our wise mind. What I want to look at here is when the guilt and the shame are justified, but it's not effective to act on these. And I'm going to use the example of a recent TV programme called The Trouble with Maggie Cole. I've just started watching this TV programme. I've really enjoyed it. And the episodes that I'm referring to are the first few. I'm not entirely sure what happens after that. There's an interesting clip at the beginning, so I'm not quite sure whether it's sort of there's some not so good bits in here. So the bits that I'm referring to are just the few episodes at the beginning if you're thinking of tuning in and watching this. So Maggie Cole lives in a village, and she calls herself a local historian, and she manages a souvenir shop as a local monument. Anyway, a journalist contacts her and asks her to do an interview to talk about the history of the village and this particular monument. However, he's not that enthused about doing the interview. So what he does is he persuades her that it'd be a really good idea to have a few double gins down at the pub. and have a bit of a chat about the village in general. So what emerges from this is that Maggie ends up telling him lots and lots of details about individual villages. And then this is broadcast as the radio chat. Now, Maggie is so excited about this radio chat because she doesn't realise he's going to divulge all this information about all the villages, that she gathers all her friends and relations into a lovely party and then broadcasts this radio chat on very loudspeakers. And what she broadcasts to her friends and relations is the gossip about the local GP's husband, who happens to be her GP, who is said to be having an affair with a man. Her best friend, who was down to get her husband's job, but she says isn't the brightest spark going. The local writer, who she says gets all of his material from the local residents. The local shopkeeper's daughter, who she implies knows an awful lot of men in not a healthy way. And the local pub landlord, who she links to the mafia. So as you can imagine, when this radio chat is broadcast and all this is divulged, it's a lot of horrified faces. And eventually this goes into the local paper with her in a witch's costume with the headline, "Nosy Parker Spills Local Secrets." Now, I watched that and I just thought, how do you come back from that? Because this is a small village, there's no way really of hiding, is there? Now, it's really interesting if you watch this, because what she does is she does a lot of that minimising and denial that we do when we know we've done something wrong, but we really don't want to own it. And so she does a lot of, oh, it'll be fine, it's not that bad, they'll come round. And then what she does is a lot of really great examples about opposite action, because if she wants to have relationships with people in this village, then she needs to do a lot of repairing. And that's one of the key factors of guilt. In order to make sure that you address guilt when it's justified, when it's valid, you need to do repair. And sometimes you need to do an overcorrection in order to repair the rupture that you have made. So what she does is she makes herself go out when she actually wants to hide. She talks to people when she doesn't want to. And in the case of the GP, she actually makes an appointment to see them for a consultation, just so that she can get in to talk to them. And she talks and she talks and she talks and she apologises appropriately for what she has done. She also explains, but does not diminish her part in this. And she tries to make reparation. And it is a really good example of how, when we have done something that actually it is justified that we should feel that guilt, we then need to move on to do a repair. We need to make sure that we do something that allows us to repair as far as we can that relationship, because guilt and shame are based around relationships and groups. This next emotion I want to talk about is envy, because it's such an interesting emotion, and I'm pretty sure if you watch the last PowerPoint, what you'll see is that whilst envy used to be something that was used as a survival mechanism, actually now it's more about what we're wanting rather than what we're needing. And when you think about envy, it's a really useful way of surviving, because if you haven't got shelter, if you haven't got enough food, enough water, enough contact with other people, and other people you see other people have, it gives you an urge and motivation to go and get that, doesn't it? However, in the world that we live in, particularly in Britain, for the majority of us, for the majority of the time, we're not talking about our essential necessities. We're talking about things that we are shown that we want, which is very, very different and has a completely different effect on us. So if you remember the monkey experiment, those monkeys were really quite happy with getting a banana for the task. And when the monkey got the grape, the other monkey didn't need a grape. The monkey wanted a grape, and that's very different. It sets up a completely different chain of events. And this is really important, because if you look at this picture up here, you know, she most definitely has a bigger plant, doesn't she? And she most definitely looks like she wants that plant. Does she actually need it? And this is where envy can make us feel really miserable. So what we might be seeing is yeah, our envy is entirely justified and valid, because other people have got things that we haven't got that we might want. However, is it effective to feel that level of intensity with envy? Because when you look back at envy, what it does is it consumes us. It narrows our attention. It means that we are completely focused on what it is we think we want. We think about that constantly, about why we haven't got it and how we can get it, or how we could destroy what somebody else has had. And we don't appreciate the things that we actually do have, or the things that other people are doing for us. So the majority of the time, envy is not an effective emotion to act upon. Now, for some reason, that part hasn't come up. Okay, so when you're acting opposite to envy, the urge is to either destroy or go after the thing that you want. So your opposite action is to not do that. You're not going to seek it. You're not going to destroy it. In fact, what you're going to do instead is do that thing of counting your blessings. So it sounds very cliched, doesn't it? But if you make a list of all the things that you're thankful for, that's what you're inviting your brain to focus on, and that's what's going to make a change to your feelings. So, and don't discount things that feel like they're too small, or that you diminish them. And don't exaggerate the things that you haven't got. Have a look at the wider picture. Have a look at the wider picture, not only for yourself, but also for the person that you're envying. Are there things that you don't know about their situation? Somebody's got an amazing, or looks like they've got an amazing house with all the things that you assume they need. Is that actually true, or are there other things going on behind closed doors that actually don't make that person happy at all? And then opposite action all the way is the whole of our experience, isn't it? So you're changing your posture. Envy is a horrible feeling to have. It's sort of that phrase, eaten up by envy. It's sort of like a horrible clenchy feeling in your stomach, isn't it? It's a scrunched feeling. So you're changing your posture. You unclench your hands, palms up, willing hands, fingers relaxed. Relaxing your chest, stomach muscles. Relaxing your facial muscles, a half smile, willing hands. It's very useful with envy. It's very closely related to anger. Change your body chemistry, pace breathing. Center yourself. Allow yourself to access wise mind. Envy can make us miserable. Don't allow yourself to give in to that. Make yourself more effective by thinking about, is this really effective to act on this? Or do I need to do opposite action? Is that going to get me further in the longer term? So I'm going to leave you to look through the other emotions, and what I would encourage you to do using Handout 11 is to write down times when you have felt that your emotion has been justified, times when you felt an emotion and it didn't fit the facts, it wasn't justified, and other times where you have felt that it was either justified or not, but actually it really wasn't effective to act on that emotion. The more time you can go through those sheets, the more times you can just jot things down as they come into your head, the greater your awareness is going to be about your emotions and what prompting event sets them off, and where your vulnerability factors are, to alert you to when it's not effective to act on them. Okay, so that means we're going to move on to another favourite part of mine, because as you know, I love opposite action, and I also really love problem solving too. So problem solving. Problem solving is really good when the facts themselves are the problem. Okay, so for instance, if you go back to the story about opening the office door and finding that there's a snake in there, you have got a problem. So the fact is the problem. Therefore, the urge to go and get help so that somebody removes said snake is really important. So in order to do that, you need to have some problem solving techniques. It's really important because some things are reality, aren't they? So sometimes these facts are part of our lives, and this phrase, no amount of breathing techniques will pay the rent. Sometimes you just need to solve the problem, comes from Christine Dunkley, and it's a summary that I really like, because it basically says it all, doesn't it? So the other wonderful thing about problem solving is that if you solve the problem, it reduces the frequency and the intensity of negative emotions, of emotions that you really don't want to be having a lot of the time. So we are now going to look at 7 steps to problem solving. Okay, so I'm going to take you through these using the example that I used last time of where we used fitting the facts to my journey, or my goal of getting to Harry Potter World with my friend. Okay, so if you remember, the scenario was that we were going to go to Harry Potter World. We had a ticket for there, which was at 1:30, and for those of you familiar with the place, you have to book this thing like 3 months in advance. I mean, it's ridiculous. So and this was a precious day off, so we really wanted to go to see this Harry Potter World. Okay, so the first step is observe and describe the problem situation. So if you remember right at the beginning of this PowerPoint, we were looking at how do you observe and describe, because it's really easy, isn't it, to get caught up with the emotion of the situation. It's really easy to get caught up with the assumptions, and I think you'll remember I sort of went to town a little bit when I was getting quite angry about the situation, about widening it to broader political stances and the underfunding of the railways over the years. So if we took it back to observe and describe the problem, describe the situation. So the situation was we were sitting on a train that had halted on the track 15 minutes from our destination, and this happened at about 12:30. We needed to get to our destination for about 1:30, when that was when the ticket was for. And we had heard an announcement that the train was going no further, and it was in fact going to go all the way back to Birmingham, which would be about 2 hours from our destination. So, check the facts. One of the reasons why I needed to get my level of anger down at that time was because I needed to use my interpersonal skills to talk to the poor, stressed out conductor who was coming down the train to try and explain to people what was happening. I also wanted to get my anger down so that I could actually communicate with other people in the train, just to see if there was any information that they had. Okay, so what I needed to check out when I was checking the facts was the situation as I saw it, and was the train going to go to the previous stop, or was it definitely going to go back to Birmingham? So if we went back to the previous stop, that would take us about an hour's drive away from the destination and 30 minutes by train. So identify your goal in solving the problem. The goal was most definitely that we wanted to go to Harry Potter World. We wanted to get there, ideally on time. If we couldn't do that, our goal was to do some damage limitation, so basically we could salvage our day out. Okay. Now, I love this bit. Brainstorm lots of solutions. And what's really important about this is all ideas are welcome. So when you're trying to come up with solutions, particularly when you're in emotion mind, it can feel like you've got a bit of a block. So the way around that is to come up with things that you probably wouldn't do, or are a bit ridiculous, and that sort of helps generate other ideas and helps clear our mind, reduce a bit of tension, so that we can have a look at other options. Okay, so one of the ridiculous ones that we came up with, well, you may not think they were ridiculous, I mean for some people they may work, was we thought, let's just get off the train now, where it is on the track, and walk over the fields that we could see to the nearest road and hitch a lift. So that's an option. The other option was, let's get off the train, walk across the field and find some contact somewhere where we could make a phone call and see if we could hire a helicopter to take us, because that could land in the fields and take us. So you can see we were really going for a wide range of ideas at this point. And the other thing we were trying to do was enlist the help of people around us. And this is a really important one, and one that often people need to use opposite action to do in itself, because you might not go with their ideas, and that's okay. So for instance, there was a time when I went round to a relative's house, and she said to me, do you know, I really don't know how to rearrange this room. How would you do it? And I must have looked a little bit alarmed, because I just thought, oh my God, am I going to tell her how to rearrange a room and then she's going to feel she's got to go with that? And she must have seen my face, because she said, no, it's okay. Just give me your ideas, because I might not use them. But if you give me some ideas, it will help me know better what I want to do. And I thought it was a really good example of, if we just get ideas from other people, it generates ideas for themselves, but it also allows us to step back and go, ooh, do you know what, that doesn't feel quite right. I don't think I'd go with that. So one of the other options we came up with was we could, when we go to the next station, we could take a coach to Milton Keynes, which is where the coach was going to be going, and hope that there was transport to Watford Station, because we knew at that point that trains were not allowed to go to Watford Station. The other option would be to get a taxi from the station that we were dropped off at. The other one would be to go back to Birmingham and to find some other entertainment and find a way of salvaging the day. So once you've got your list of options and solutions, ridiculous or not, then the next thing you do is you start to use your wise mind and pros and cons to help you find a solution that fits the goal and is most likely to work. Okay, and this one's really important. Okay, so getting off a stationary train, it's really quite difficult. I don't know if you've ever tried it, but the conductors are not that willing to open the doors, so there's a bit of an obstacle. It's not likely to work. Even if we did have sufficient money to hire a helicopter, they're not usually available at the moment's notice. And hitching a lift off somebody on a road that we don't know to an area that we're not familiar with is possibly not safe. So the cons would be we would be putting ourselves at risk. So we had a look at the other options, and we had a look at the goals, and the goal that felt really important to us was to put as much energy we could into getting to Harry Potter World. So we thought of, okay, if we're going to go down that route, we need to look at, well, if we have a look at the option of getting a coach to Milton Keynes, we are relying on hope that there is transport, and it would also take time to get to Milton Keynes. If we get a taxi from the station that we're going to Harry Potter World, we need to check out how much that is going to cost us and whether we could get that money back from the train company. So we spent quite a bit of time using Wise Mind and pros and cons to help us make a decision. So the next one is put the solution into action, and that's sometimes where we can get a bit stuck, because we can find solutions that look like they might work, but they sort of require something from us. So if we went with any of the options that we'd come up with, which was either about getting the coach to Milton Keynes and trying to find some transport there, or getting a taxi or something like that, we need to talk to people. We need to look realistically about whether that is a possibility. And when you're in a high state of anxiety and there's a lot of strong emotions around, quite hard to think clearly, and it's obviously sometimes generates other emotions that you then need to do opposite action with in order to put this solution into action. So where do we normally come unstuck with this? Well, sometimes because we have been in a high state of emotion, we sort of go into that slump phase of, oh God, this just feels like really hard work now. It's just too much hard work to do. Too tired, I don't have time to do this, all of those excuses that we come up with. And that's when we're needing to use opposite action and fitting the facts of, actually, am I too physically exhausted to do this? Is this really too hard? And if it isn't, and if this isn't fitting the facts, so I haven't got a medical condition that means I'm flat on the floor and I can't move, then actually I need to do opposite action. Is the fear generating some thoughts like, if this doesn't work, I'm going to look like a right idiot, or a sort of hooking into a belief, an unhelpful belief, like if this won't work, I'll be a failure. People will get mad at me, people will be cross. Or do we get caught up in that old chestnut of willfulness where we just go, well, I shouldn't have to solve this. They caused it, they need to sort it out. So quite frankly, if we'd have gone with that option, we'd still be stuck at the station now, because train companies are not particularly well known for sorting stuff out like that. What about impulsiveness? Maybe what we do is we just run headfirst into the problem and we come up with some really ineffective solutions, like banging on the door of the train trying to be let out onto the track. Okay. And then what we do is we evaluate the results of implementing the solution. So we made the choice to get the taxi. And there are consequences that come with that. One of the consequences is the risk that we won't be reimbursed, and we needed to account for that. We also evaluated the other solutions. Would we have been better to try and salvage the day and go back to Birmingham? And we also need to evaluate the fact that actually by the time we got to Harry Potter World, we were suffering the after effects of having had that level of anger and anxiety running through our bodies for quite some time. So what's really important about evaluating the results is to bear in mind that we get caught up in what we would call so the word's gone, it will come back to me. Get caught up into thinking about, actually, if we'd have known that now, we'd have done something differently. So there's a word for that, isn't it? It's probably coming to you now, it's not coming to me. If I'd have known about that, I'd have done it differently. Hindsight bias, there we go. So when we come up with that, we don't take account of the fact that actually we don't know then what we know now. So what we can only do is make the best decision at that time with the information that we've got, and that is all anybody can do. Therefore, it is all an experiment. So what we can do is we can say, okay, so if I know now further information and I can draw on what I did before, how could that help me in the future? How could I learn from that? Are the things that I did that came in really useful? Are the things that I need to learn to do for next time? What did I learn about myself? How can I build on this? How can I adapt this? So the whole 7 steps of problem solving not only help solve the problem in that moment, but they also give us skills that help us solve future problems. And by confronting the problem and dealing with it, what we're constantly doing is making sure that we develop and grow in a more effective way so that we are more equipped to deal with the world. Okay. I want to just look briefly at problem solving for longer term goals. Some of the things that we've looked at are really easy to sort out, well, not really easy, but manageable to sort out in the short term. We can use our interpersonal skills to utilise help that's available at the moment. We can use our interpersonal skills and opposite action to get a refund. We can problem solve guilt by repairing, making a repair to a relationship, or making an overcorrection so that we manage our guilt. We can use our interpersonal skills to say no to something that is going to cause a problem for us. Or we can create a routine or structure to the day. We can look at decisions about whether to buy something or not in that moment. All of those things quite short term. There are longer term problems that are going to need longer term solutions and need to be broken down into smaller steps. So for instance, if you want to get a new job, there are going to be steps to that. For one thing, you need to think about what it is I'd really like to do. And then you need to think about, well, what are the sort of jobs out there that would meet these needs? And do I need to do some additional study in order to do that? If I do need to do the additional study, what would I need to do? Do I need to get help with interview skills? Do I need to get help with doing my CV? Do I need to get help with applying for jobs? All of those are small steps that need to be broken down into manageable chunks to achieve our long-term goal, which would solve our problem. And so when you're thinking about problem solving, think about things that can be solved in the short term. Think about things that you want to sort out for the longer term that fit in with your long-term goals, how you can break those down into manageable chunks. So we're at that delightful stage, which you all love, is where we look at the homework tasks for the week. Okay, so what we've been focusing on in the last couple of weeks has been fitting the facts, opposite action and problem solving. So what you really need to do is to refresh your memory on that by reading through the handouts from, I think it's about 7 to 13, but particularly for this session, handouts 9 and 11 to 13. And then what we want you to do is we want you to practice opposite action and problem solving as many times as you possibly can, and definitely more than once, on worksheets 7 and 8. So, happy practicing. And as we come to the end of this video, I just want you to just notice your position, adjust, notice your body wants to move in any way, scan yourself from the top of your head down to the tips of your toes, allow yourself just to notice. And then just to notice what comes into your mind when I say to you, what are you taking away from this session? And then to jot down something that makes you smile, to go on this list that we're creating about things that you can look at that make you smile on a daily basis. And I will see you next week.